program that this is the beginning of the end. My name is Bernhard Spielberg, and I am a professor of pastoral theology at DePaul University in Germany, and have the pleasure and the honor to introduce you to Felix Wilfred, who will give the keynote this evening. There is this story about a student being asked, "What is Vatican II?" And the student answers, "It's the Pope's summer residence, I suppose." The good thing about this story is that Vatican II seems to be something so normal to Catholics all across the globe that they even don't really know what this council was about. One who contributed a lot to this perspective on Vatican II is Felix Wilfred. He is not only a witness of this council, he is an agent of the transformation of the Catholic Church after Vatican II. You can see how he, or in which various places he worked as an agent. He was teacher in Tiruchirappalli in the Interregional Seminary. He was member of the International Theological Commission in Rome, and he was in the Theological Advisory Committee of the FIBC. On all these places, he did a lot for the inculturation of what we would say Catholicism is like today in Asia. And he is, until now, editor-in-chief of Concilium. I think it would be inappropriate just to introduce somebody like Felix Wilfred in this Western-style individualistic manner. Because what I learned from him, for example, is that inclusivism counts. So it's not about attributing certain merits to people, it's about the relation we have with them. The relation is a crucial issue of being church. And so I would just like to say at this moment what I personally have learned from you. To prepare this short introduction, I was just looking into my own dissertation, which is back 8-9 years now. But I had a lot of quotations of Felix Wilfred in there. And so I learned actually 3 things from him. The first thing is that inclusivism is definitely the crucial point of being church today, and it's one of the great gifts we as Western theologians receive from the Asian perspective on being church, on the gospel. The second thing is that there is a precedence of anthropology over ecclesiology. So this does not negate in any way the necessity of good theology, but you first have to know the people before you know what church is for. And the third thing I learned is that the gospel is to be discovered and is to be proclaimed among the poor at first. Thank you very much for being here, and welcome, Felix Wilfred.
Thank you, Professor Spielberg, for this kind introduction. I'm reminded about an anecdote of a conference like this. The last day, people have to rush to the airport and other engagements. And finally, the last speaker was speaking. There was one person very attentive, listening. It was a consolation, because there's one person at least listening carefully to his talk. After he completed his talk, went and thanked him profusely for being so kind and attentive. He said, "Sir, don't need to thank me, I'm the next speaker." I suppose there's no next speaker after me. We are at the world center of world Catholicism. I suppose it is not inappropriate to start quoting from the canon law. which I want to do now. So, one of the purposes of Vatican II, very clearly enunciated by Pope John 23rd, was the Christian unity. That was one central purpose. Was reiterated also by Pope Paul VI. The Code of Canon Law, promulgated 1983, is supposed to operationalize the vision of Vatican II. Therefore, I was curious to find out what has the canon law to say, because that's the operational part about ecumenism. There are 1,752 canons, and I was so surprised there was only one canon relating to ecumenism. Though John said that was one of the main purposes of Vatican. And let us read that canon. You have it here. It says, "It is primarily for the supreme church authority to foster and direct the ecumenical movement among the Catholics, whose scope is the restoration of unity among all Christians. And it's for the bishops and episcopal conferences promoting it according to norms of law." So we have Unitatis Redemptio and Orientalium Ecclesiarum, these two documents. Let us look at the canon, which speaks about that the supreme authority is in charge of ecumenism. Quite different from many of the talks we listen here, where ecumenism is from below. So this canon says it's a supreme authority, and it's the duty of the bishops, a top-down approach, very clearly, which we find in this canon. And the restoration of unity, still a lingering thought, or rather the conviction of many that the true Church of Christ subsists. That's some kind of, but still in the Hermeneutics of Vatican, many say it's equal to is. It's not subsist, don't play with words, is. So we can hear that tonality in this canon. As I said, there's nothing of people of God relating to ecumenism. It's the authority which promotes ecumenism, what I call institutional ecumenism. Therefore, no wonder that in the last decades, this ecumenism was fostered through interdenominational dialogue, institutional, bilateral, institutional dialogue with other denominations. We want to take a critical look at this. And I would like to present under three parts. Will be in three parts. The first part will be on Asian Ecumenical Path. The second, insight from interreligious. Second part will be insight from interreligious relationship for a new ecumenical practice. What can we learn from interreligious dialogue for ecumenism? And the third part will be more explicitly related to the title of my presentation. That is, it will speak about future of ecumenism from postcolonial perspective. Though this perspective is present in the first two, it will be more explicit in the third part. Let us come to the first part, Asian Ecumenical Path. 1910, you remember, of course, none of us was alive, at the zenith of the missionary movement, the Edinburgh Conference, 1910, and there were 1,200 people represented, the zenith of missionary movement, all white people except very few from the south. There was half a dozen people from Asia. Missionary movement was a well-oiled machine. It was functioning. There was a missionary sent, the funds raised, in the field. So among them was a few Indians and a couple of Chinese. And one of them was V.S. Azaria. He was a pastor, later he became a bishop. And Azaria made a short speech, in which he said, I will read the quote later, let me say the spirit of it, that while you are doing this whole wonderful thing, we are very thankful to you. Then he ended, give us friends. Let me read the quote. Through all the ages to come, the Indian Church will rise up in gratitude to attest the heroism and self-denying labors of the missionary body. You have given us your good to feed the poor. You have given your bodies to be bought. We ask for love. Give us friends. Through these words, Azaria indicated something very different. It's also significant for ecumenism. Implied herein is a post-colonial critique of power relationships in the mission of the church. There's a need for mutuality. Where there is domination, there is no room for friendship or equality. I tend to think that the colonial mission was perhaps the greatest religious enterprise in human history, but it was an enterprise without friendship, without intersubjectivity. Thanks to this heritage of Azaria and the Chinese representative Cheng Qing-yi and other Asian participants in the Edinburgh Conference, today there is a shift of attention from denominations to indigenous forms of Christianities. From denominations to indigenous forms of Christianity. In other words, what's happening in Asia is similar to the process in the early Christianity, which led to different ecclesial traditions due to particular culture, history, vision, and worldviews. The ecumenical, far from being defined narrowly, is increasingly referring to communication among the various expressions of Christianity, conditioned by history and by context. The possibility of this is foreseen in Lumen Gentium, if you read in a passage, number 23, where it compares the formation of early Christian churches to the possibility of church conferences becoming. Which means that structurally you have synodal structure, patriarchal structure, just earlier, that kind of new indigenous Christianities. So the shift from denominational past division, the future of creation of new Christianities. And what's happening in the world today, lead us to think that probably this is the direction we need to move. Another refreshing ecumenical force in Asia has been the marginalized peoples and groups. They have contributed, particularly the untouchables, the Dalits, indigenous peoples and tribals, and the discriminated Barokumin of Japan. Groups like the untouchables have suffered discrimination from the churches in different forms. Hence, the ecumenical agenda for them is not reconciliation and unity among the churches, but a challenge to all of them for unity of the churches divided by caste divisions. Therefore, in the history of conversions, if you see somebody converts to Christianity not because he has found Anglicanism is a true church or Presbyterianism is a true church, that's not the reason. But there are other reasons where they felt accepted as equal, not discriminated. They said, here is the true church. They may dispute on the basis of doctrine, but the reality is, this is what happened. In conversion, the choice of the Christian denomination is not based on which one gives you orthodoxy or purity of doctrines, truths, but which one integrates them within the community, inclusive. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female, Greek, for you are all one Jesus Christ. This is the unity of the people, the marginalized. So this whole contribution from the marginalized in Asia to ecumenical movement. Next, in Asia, development towards non-denominational church have taken place. And that's quite from the early 20th century, immediately after Edinburgh. So the preoccupation was not so much how to reconcile historical divisions and heal it, but the creation of indigenous Christianities. And there was in China, the effort, 1913 Shanghai, the National Christian Conference, 1913. Therefore, one people, one gathered in one church. A common platform of Protestant churches. 1950s, in China, the emergence of three patriotic movements: self-governance, self-support, self-propagation of the gospel. Of course, today we relate it to the situation of the churches in China. But these three self-movements were already beginning of the 20th century. After Edinburgh Conference, they moved to that indigenous. Of course, today it's complicated because of the involvement of the government, what it does. But in spirit, it was movement towards indigenous Christianities with the support the self-propagation of that. So the influence of the foreign influence was looked at very differently from there. And you have in India, 1947, the formation of the history the first time that the three denominations coming together to form one Church of South India. Today it exists. And later on, 1970, also Church of North India. If you look at from the institutional perspective, in Asia you have Christian Conference of Asia, CCA, and there's a Protestant Orthodox denomination together. We have Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, which represents the Roman Catholic Church. So there has been close collaboration. And one of the things, the close collaboration between the Protestant churches represented by CCA, I'm speaking more at the institutional level, the FABC, was to clarify the relationship between mission and dialogue. This was a crucial point in all the churches, mainline churches, and especially for the Roman Catholic Church. There were documents on the relationship of mission and dialogue, where unfortunately Vatican did not understand. So dialogue was the means for evangelization. You dialogue, but it should lead to evangelization, conversion. This was questioned by CCA, Catholic Conference of Asia, and FABC. 1986, I was also participant. Samartha, who was a very leading figure in WCC, Interreligious Dialogue, he was there. So we brought out a statement, brief statement. I want to read out from that. It was called that living and working together with brothers and sisters of other faiths. So read. One of the crucial point of discussion is mission, and we affirm that dialogue and mission have their own integrity and freedom. They are distinct but not unrelated. Dialogue is not a tool or instrument for mission and evangelization, but does influence the way church perceives and practices mission in a pluralistic society. I think this is very important, that dialogue is not made a means. It's also true of ecumenical. I will come to that later. The effort of the churches or the various regions of Asia to come together, engage themselves in mission witness has contributed also to create, this other contribution, to create a political, regional, or we call solidarity among the Asian nations. So this is one of the things. So we may not be too triumphalistic, but certainly the unity created, in terms of the region, South Asian region or Southeast Asian region, you have SAARC, you have ASEAN. So it was preceded by ecumenical bodies. Therefore, regional political groupings was preceded. So we can be, in a way, proud that the church preceded this kind of regional unity, which is something to be appreciated. Given the brevity of time, I would like to go to the second part. Let us see. I'm sorry I could not. Yeah, part 2. Insights from interreligious relationships, the ecumenical practice. Ecumenical movement pioneered different theology of religion than the one that characterized the missionary period. Development of a more positive attitude towards other religions owes a lot to global ecumenical movement. Most ecumenical meetings that framed the interreligious agenda was held in Asia. Therefore, it was called wider ecumenism. Wider ecumenism, where it include also people's, if it's a unity, is a purpose, unity of humanity, or of human race. So it was called wider ecumenism. In a statement of the Commission on Ecumenism and Dialogue, in 2000, we read the following. It says that we must keep in mind that the unity of the churches is at the service of the unity of humankind, of which the churches, like Jesus, their founder, are servants. Furthermore, the human race is entrusted with the stewardship of all creation, so that the integrity of creation falls within the ultimate scope of ecumenism. Therefore, the unity of the religions, unity of the creation, everything falls within the agenda of ecumenism, what's called wider ecumenism. The point was well formulated by Conrad Reiser in the form of a series of questions. Let me come to that. Yeah. He's asking, can the churches and those responsible for ecumenical organization agree on a sufficiently firm common base for the understanding of ecumenism? Does ecumenism in the proper sense relate only to the search of communion among the Christian churches? Or should it be opened up to relation with other religious communities, as is frequently advocated in Asia? Should the ecumenical movement reach beyond the churches to make alliances with the groups in civil society? What's the proper relationship between the commitment to church unity and to social justice? Are common witness and evangelism more important than church unity? So these are the critical questions Conrad Reiser raised. While ecumenism need not be a threat to ecumenism, that's how it was felt by some. It's a threat to real ecumenism. No, there's nothing like that. Experience in Asia has shown that they are intertwined and are mutually supportive. Ecumenical movement and interreligious dialogue are intertwined and mutually supportive. As a result, an effective intra-religious dialogue among Christian churches has strengthened the interreligious dialogue of the wider ecumenism. Conversely, interreligious dialogue has called for greater unity and collaboration among the Christian churches and communities. On the other hand, the practice of interreligious dialogue has turned out to be the practice of interreligious has turned out to be an important source for ecumenism to learn from. Can we, in short, what can we learn from interreligious dialogue for ecumenism? That's the point. First, I would like to propose a non-teleological approach to ecumenism. Non-teleological. St. Augustine distinguishes between two things in our life, I think very important. He says, uti et frui. Uti means you use things. I get up, I brush my teeth, I eat. So there are things which you use daily. It's fine. One dimension of life. Frui, enjoyment. That means there's nothing beyond that. A good picture, painting, is an enjoyment. One sunrise is an enjoyment. Therefore, ecumenism should be non-teleological. It should be far within what Augustine calls frui, enjoy. What does that mean? No hurry with unity and consensus. No need to be in a hurry. Imperial model, an organizational model, which seek quickly bring everything under a central direction in unity. That's a bad model for relationships. The temptation to reduce everything into unitary frame. In interreligious relationship for a long time what dominated was theology of fulfillment. Similar in ecumenical relationships, the preoccupation to move towards organic unity. Recognizing the otherness of the other, the religious other, one should not hurry with the doctrinal concerns to judge other denominations, appreciate the history and tradition of other Christian churches for the value in themselves, not in view of something else. Faith in the presence of the Spirit, cooperation, common involvement is of greater importance to the people's society. So dialogue as a value in itself and mutual learning, etc., etc. Similarly, ecumenical movement endeavors could be enlivened today by drawing from non-religious sources and traditions. The conversation among churches need not restrict to their doctrines and worship. The ecumenical net should be cast wider in the area of humanity and the intricate problems it is facing today. Justice, peace, integrity of creation sets out an important ecumenical agenda for many years to come. So too the concern which forms part of the WCC Commission of Churches on International Affairs. These will take precedence over all other concerns. That's what we would like to present. These are the priority concerns, should be foremost in the agenda. However, there are another set of issues which should also form part of ecumenical engagement. I mean the question of authority and power and the conception in the church. This is also very crucial. I will try to deal it in two parts, two subdivisions. The internal church relationships, exercise of power, the churches and the exercise of power in relation to the world and democratic aspirations of the world today. Let's begin with the inner church issue of power. For those who focus on the doctrinal reconciliation among the denominations, it is good to remember that more than doctrines, it's a conception of power and juridicism in the Roman Catholic Church that constitutes one of the most serious obstacles to ecumenism. The conception of power and its exercise in the Roman Catholic Church is the biggest obstacle to ecumenism today. We should recognize this. Lucas Vischer, leading ecumenist of this time, already indicated where the real problem lies. Let me quote him. He said, the question about the proper juridical form of the church is an eminently ecumenical problem. The juridicism of the Roman Catholic Church is the object of earnest and radical criticism from the side of the Orthodox as well as from the churches of the Reformation. They see in the premises as well as in the conclusions of canon law some of the deepest differences which divide them from the Roman Catholic Church. Therefore, quite interesting, it's not the doctrines, power and its exercise which divide the Roman Catholic. At least we are here at the center of Catholicism, so we need to be self-critical. Another thing we learn from interreligious dialogue is a reconception of truth, which I think is also important for ecumenism, a reconception of truth. Truth as a set of doctrine to be believed in offers no real clue or approach to other religious traditions. We need to begin from somewhere else. One of the realizations in the interreligious understanding is what is expressed in Rig Veda, the earliest Veda. It said, Egam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is one, but the sages have called it by many names. It was written before Christ, at least 1,000 years before Christ. Egam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is one, but sages are spoken in different ways. If we follow the same in ecumenical dialogue, it would mean that instead of resolving hurriedly doctrinal differences to arrive at a goal, teleological goal of unity, We'll go deeper in the different theological languages and accents of truth of the gospel has been expressed, and would contemplate the texture of truth refracted through the prism of different denominations. Finally, the rainbow of the truth. Truth is a rainbow. All the colors of the truth. We begin to appreciate aesthetics of the difference. The ancient intuition about truth can be operationalized today through the instrumentality of contemporary hermeneutics applied to claims of religious truths and interpreting religious resources. The understanding of ecumenism and the relationship among the churches will be different if we employ new insights and perspectives on hermeneutics. In this connection, I would like to underline the importance of hermeneutics of Vatican II that's not only diachronic but also synchronic. There's so much of discussion. Ratzinger and Kasper break their heads. Whether there's a continuity or discontinuity is absolutely, is quite irrelevant for us in Asia. The minutiae of whether this is meant. So I think they should learn the basics of hermeneutics, because hermeneutics does not relate only to the intention of the author or the text. The text is open-ended. 11th century, an Indian hermit, Abhinav Gupta, said beautifully, he is a great hermeneutist, he said that the text is like a daughter. So the author has produced, but the author need not be the best interpreter of her beauty. Father need not be the best interpreter. The best interpreter of beauty could be her lover, husband, a friend. So once the text is released, it's open-ended. So is Vatican II. So you are falling into an antiquated hermeneutics of finding the intentions of what the council. Therefore, Ratzinger saying this is bound with in relationship to trend, it must be interpreted. Kasper saying something, you must interpret it. These jumbles of things, which is only confusing. So, we must interpret Vatican II with life. I will give you an example. How Japanese bishop acted post-colonial. This is post-colonial, that's the main thing. So, 1998, there was the Roman Synod on Asia. You know, curiously, irony that all the Roman African Synod was in Rome, Asian Synod was in Rome. So, they drew up, as you know, the Linea Menta. That's a document, you know. They write it, first draft, and then the questions. And the bishops and the people have to write answers, like the children, school, they have to answer, and it will be coordinated in Rome. I have witnessed, talked to Japanese bishop, very intelligent, very perceptive, they will listen. If they don't understand, they will have secretary to translate for them, etc., very attentive. So the Japanese received this document. They didn't understand anything because it was in English. I hope it was not in Latin, it still was. So they didn't know what to do. So they translated into Japanese and then they circulated around. But then they found the questions were not relating to what they were living. So they decided to formulate their own questions and answer those questions and sent to Rome, which angered them, Vatican. Then they said the Japanese bishops are so good, must be some missionary who must have instigated. I know Cardinal Hamao, who was the cardinal later, became so furious. It's an insult to us Japanese. We are not capable of doing this. So, the point which I want to say is that we need the issues interpreted through life, Vatican II, and not a textual authenticity or the intentions of the author. That's only one, That's the real, etc. The same must be applied also to Vatican. So, when we speak of the doctrine, this is also true. For this, we need to build further on what Vatican said about hierarchy of truths. Hierarchy of truths. So, what the Pope speaks about Christ and what he speaks to a team of football players are not the same level, because the Pope has spoken. Hierarchy of truths. That has helped in some sense, One of the obstacles in ecumenical relationship, the Marian devotion. One time it was 19th century, the papacy was under question, Marian documents were questioned, therefore Eucharist was, these are the three. If you follow these three, you are true Catholic. Very apologetic. So they had to put in the first place Marian dogma because that is a distinguishing mark. But now, hierarchy of truths may not be that important as 19th century reactionary integralism, ultramontanism thought about it. It must be put in its place, right place. Therefore, this hierarchy, there must be hierarchy of truths. Unitas is read in the Classio number 11, as well as there must be, proportionately hierarchy of laws. Not all the laws are in the same place. Now, let us reflect. This is the first reflection, the obstacle of juridicism, the exercise of power in the church, which constitutes a major difficulty, at least as far as the Roman Catholic Church is concerned. Now, let's see that power question in relation to the exercise in the larger society. Some of the churches have an understanding of power that resonates with the medieval and feudal models in total contrast with participatory approach, based on human dignity and rights, and respectful of the respectful of modern democratic aspirations. Churches embedded in traditional conception of authority and power are increasingly being challenged by conception of power in which checks and balances are integral part. As example, I may adduce here the call to make human dignity and human rights among the fundamental principles of canonical order in the Roman Catholic Church. There was an effort for Lex Fundamentalis Ecclesiae. 2 months back, I was at the Leuven University Faculty of Canon Law. I edited a volume on revision of Code of Canon Law, which in 6 languages translated. There was 150 canonists were there. So I raised the question, friends tell me you are all canonists. What's the difference between Sharia and canon law? They are shocked. The Sharia is a law for a community, here's canon law for a community. Therefore, it restricts women, here you don't order women. And according to the proper juridical practice, everybody has a right to defend himself. You have a canon law where you have late sententia, by the very act you are already condemned. So, from a formal angle, there's a lot of similarity. If you do not make canon law as the human rights as the foundation of canon law, then it's questionable. Therefore, the exercise of it, because we are talking about ecumenism, larger, wider ecumenism, with the unity of humanity, the church should be prepared to integrate the basic human dignity and rights as part of the governing structure of the churches. And this is, as long as it is not there, and I think the problems will persist. And but we find a completely different practice in the early church, the participatory, not this whole hierarchical. You know that there was a whole 17th, 18th century onwards, this whole divine right of kings, that is to say the king is empowered directly from God, and that was opposed by canonists and others, Suarez and others. No, power comes from the people, not directly. But simultaneously there are two agents who receive power directly from God. One was the emperor or king, the other one was the pope and bishops. Now one side is clarified, the other side is still, still limping. We must clear a church with this understanding of power, where conception of direct, no. Early church said, let me quote, quod omnes tangit, ab omnibus tractari, yet approbari debat. That was the first principle. What is common to all must be deliberated and approved by all. So when you talk to bishops, they will say the church is not a democracy. But the same way they will not say church is not a monarchy. They are more happily with monarchy, church as monarchy, than a democracy. So we need to take into account the aspiration, the model of the early church, where there's participation, etc., which helps to wide open the agenda of unity to the whole society, the world, etc., etc. Now let me come to the last part. That is future of ecumenism from postcolonial perspective, some thoughts. When I speak in postcolonialism, I reminded of an anecdote here. I was 17 years old when I started my studies in Italy. So that summer I went to London. So there was a demonstration because there was a discrimination against other people, races, and against the Indian community. So there was a demonstration by the Indians in London against the discrimination they felt. So what struck me was, that was 1965. One Indian woman was holding a placard which very concisely expressed the matter. We are here because you were there. So that was the first lesson I learned about postcolonialism, which came much later. But it deeply, profoundly, it expressed something which was already 50 years back, which later got developed in postcolonial theories. Postcolonial reading of ecumenical practice helps us to place emphasis on diversity rather than on unity. Difference rather than uniformity. La différence, French. There's certainly room to speak of unity between man and woman when you think of their common humanity. You can think of man and woman, yes, because they share common humanity. So the sharing of common humanity becomes the basis of unity. But still deeper, and yet what constitutes deeper union between man and woman is the difference of man and woman. That is the basis of bonds of union. Precisely because they are different, the union becomes deeper. And I think this is a very good analogy which you can use in interdenominational relationships. Precisely because we are different, our union is deeper. And we need not hurry. Are we not in an age when through ecumenical movement we celebrate the difference? The ecumenical cause is lost when we interpret difference as deviance. So we must rethink whether difference has been interpreted as deviance, two completely different things. The ecumenical cause is lost, yes. The difference the denominations and Christian group represent is a sign of richness of Christianity and not a weakness to be lamented about. Postcolonial theories can help us to appreciate in the ecumenical movement the value of difference and pluralism. Postcolonialism helps us also to have a relational self-definition. That means you do not, so the Irish Protestant Catholics you cannot define in abstract. So who is an Irish Protestant cannot be defined without Irish Catholic. The mutuality. The other is included in the self-definition of A, B is included in self-definition. Therefore there is a mutuality. One cannot be defined without relationship to the other. A relationship. The Catholics is implied in understanding of the Protestant. The Protestant is implied. So also same thing can be said about the Orthodox. Further, postcolonialism goes into the analysis of discourses that go to contest realities like the Orient. No time to explain all that. If we apply this to ecumenism, we will need to analyze the Catholic and the Protestant are constructed through the use of language and discourses. It's a way of speaking. It's not something existing like that. What effectively affects the people is how it is talked about. In your place, in a region, how we talked about Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox. A good ecumenical practice would presuppose a critical approach to the role language and discourse play in constructing the other denominations, the other Christian belief. It would be interesting to study, for example, how traditionally discourse among the Irish Catholics are constructed about Protestants and vice versa. how the discourses of traditional Catholics construct Pentecostal movements, and how Pentecostal discourse about Catholics. It would also be interesting to study how Russian Orthodox Church constructs the discourse about the Protestants and Catholics in the context of ethno-nationalism. You know that in Russia, this is the whole problem, Central Asia, very interesting. The Russian Orthodox Church is much closer to the Muslims rather than the Protestants, and they come and aggressive. They're more close because they feel that the Muslims are one ethnically with them, rather than the Protestants and Catholics were coming from outside. So you could see how the relational reality is. Protestant Catholics in the context of ethno-nation, not unlike the case of Indian caste, each denomination has in the discourse of the other an ascriptive identity. That means a pre-given identity. It's called ascriptive identity. The other church denomination communities represented something fixed and unchanging. In short, various Christian denominations are different discursive practices with the resources in history and tradition. Closely connected with it is also the issue of representation, how it represents not only an epistemological issue, but a deeply political issue and platform for the play of power. Postcolonial theoretical forays have shown that a stereotypical representation of the other is a strategy for power and control. So you define Protestants like this because it's good for defining your power. This is very much, and still in some places it's still valid. Who is a Catholic and who is a Protestant has been defined mainly, sometimes uniquely by doctrinal differences. There are various other denominations that go up to make up Catholic, Protestant, and Catholic unity. Post-colonialism has been critical of abstract universalism and moral globalism that want to transcend the particular in its historical and spatial situatedness. The standard ecumenical agenda as traits of theological universalism with postcolonial approach could help to address and bring ecumenism at the level of grassroots of everyday practices of habits and behavior. Fostering dialogue at grassroots level, as has been very well shared by many of you during this conference, would imply a deconstruction of the discourses about various denominations and the kind of language we use to describe the other ecumenical circles. Let me conclude. I think 5 minutes are left. I conclude. Before that. Concluding thought, yeah. The ecumenical landscape has been changing through developments in the churches and in the institutions of the world. We need to take this into account. We are in a situation in which we are forced to redefine ecumenism itself, thanks to the profound transformation that have taken place in the last couple of decades. What were once the defining characteristic of ecumenism are no more for the new generations. Let me quote in conclusion the words of Conrad Reiser in his foreword to the second edition of the Dictionary of Ecumenical Movement. I'm thinking of the future generations. It says, now, many of the traditional, I hope it's there, Now, many of the traditional orientations of ecumenism are challenged or called into question. A new generation has moved into the position of leadership in the churches, for whom the ecumenical struggle and advances of earlier periods are no longer part of their personal memory, but at best a significant feature of recent history. So he nicely packs the whole thing. Times were when unity was thought as an important contribution for peace and reconciliation. Times have changed, generations have succeeded. I surmise the future of ecumenism and the ecumenism of the future generation lies fostering pluralism and appreciate difference, which will define the mutual relationship of the churches. Promoting jointly the same in the society and the world will be a great contribution of the churches to peace in the world. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for the talk you gave us and the inspiration you brought with the talk into the audience. the microphone is open for your questions.
My question to you, Felix, is if you can speak more about Christendom. Do you think that Christendom ideas and ideals constitute part of this post-colonial, part of what you might call the structures that need to be deconstructed with post-colonial critical cultural approaches, especially, in the light of 500 years of the Reformation that we are celebrating also? Do you think that that Christendom idea was what gave birth to some of the issues that led to the Reformation, and how the post-Tridentine Church tried to kind of respond to it?
The Christendom does not exist as a reality, but as a mentality. It exists. Like as I say, Roman is not a place, it's a mindset. An Indian can be in Rome, but you can be more Roman than Rome. So it's a mindset. Christendom is not a reality today because the modernization, secularization has dismantled this, and our French Revolution for that matter, this kind of total control of the society by the religious agent started the French Revolution in European history, and then modern secularization process, whatever it is. The mindset, it exists. And what Grace Davy calls, so very interesting, if you see, of course, American situation is different, because there was no this history of what happened in Europe, the anti-clericalism. The secularization of the European mind took place because of the whole control of the church over the legal society and the politics, etc., etc. The whole thing happened. You have a church, if you take the European Christian where Christian lived, the mass exodus from the 19th century, the workers' movement, there was no response to the workers' issue, from that it started. Therefore, the emptying of the churches. I was in Dublin, in the center of the Dublin, the Guinness is famous, right? Guinness, the heart of the city. There is a bar, which was earlier a church, and poor Guinness is buried there. He was married also in that church. So, a complete secularization. But it's not so complete. In the sense, there is something like what Grace Davy calls believing without belonging. Therefore, the Christian heritage is somehow part of me, and that's what the Islam. If something happens, if somebody burns the Bible in Texas, I don't know, in Pakistan there is a bomb goes off. So one may claim that we have nothing to do, we are secularized Christians, etc. But it has been part of the colonial history. This religion has been. That you cannot sweep it under the carpet. We cannot easily bury colonialism. The Christendom was an integral part, an ideology, which was an integral part of colonialism. So, we must need to deconstruct wherever the traces of it are there, even if it has not disappeared as a reality within Europe.
So I'm wondering if it's just a coincidence that the Reformation and colonialism happened at the same time. And I'm wondering if you can kind of draw some links, some possible links. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I'm wondering if it's more than a coincidence, right? You get the rise of the nation state in Europe, you get the division between Catholics and Protestants, and you get the movement to go out and colonize the rest of the world, which are more or less simultaneous. And I'm wondering if you could draw some links there.
Thank you for this question. If you analyze this history, Reformation was not only a religious event, it was a secular event as well. Secular significance, highly secularly significant, because there was a religious conflict. 80 years war, 30 years war, all those things, Europe was burning, you know. So how did Reformation become a secular event? You know? In the sense that it contributed to a solution by defect. Maybe that's not the right word, but let me explain, you know. So they said there are warring factions, Catholics and Protestants. How do you find a solution? Not possible. 8 wars are the solution. Today, I think the advisor of the United States Defense, I don't know how you call him, he says that war is an extension of politics. Very interesting, you know, how he looks at war. War is the extension of politics. Therefore, it gives rise to war, you know. So, this whole war-torn Europe was struggling to find a solution which was not religiously available. And during war, what do? You have Protestants and Catholics here, Protestants and Catholics here. How do you know that the Protestants will not join the other party and the Catholics will not join with this party? Therefore, nation states were the result of religious conflicts in Europe, because nation state defined, independent of your religious belonging, is the political reality which defines the identity of a person, you know. That way, I think, it created a new structure, you know, of governing structure in the world, of course, which again, ironically became a source of war, World War I and II, on the basis of nationality, National Socialism, Germany. So it was a repetition. What was invented as a solution became another problem after a few centuries, you know. So to come back to the spirit of your question, of course, the expansion, you know, happened in the 16th century, you know, more or less coincided with the Reformation of Luther. We have now celebrated 500 years of, you know, that important event. But I would not, I'm not able to see, but we have to study that. I'm not able to see direct connection between colonialism and Protestantism, you know. Of course, there is a Marx Weber's thesis of Protestant ethics and the American, you know, affluence, and that way it explains. But I'm not able to see so much connection between Lutheranism, Protestantism, and colonialism as Iberian Catholicism, the Portugal and Spain, you know, because they were affected by 10th century by Islamic occupation, the conquista, and conquer. There was a whole mentality of conquering, because they fought. It's not no more a fight between Catholics and Protestants. It's a fight with worse enemy, the Muslims who are threatening. Lepanto, you know, Venice they were threatening. So the animosity of the Iberian, you know, vis-a-vis the Muslims, the legacy still we experience today. I think which led to missionary expansion. And I think the Protestant mission started rather late. I'm not sure, you can correct me. At least in India, I know it came 1706, modern, you know, 1706, the first. Initially, they were not, you know, in that kind of, you know, bringing. Whereas because there was a whole connection between the political power and the ecclesiastical power vested in the king of, how do you call it, Portugal or Spain.
I'd like to invite you to speak a little further, if you would. Like you, I shed no tears for the demise of Christendom. One question that remains for me is in the post-colonial context, whether the emphasis on pluralism and differences has actually made an advance on the question of nationalism. Whatever restraint or whatever notion of Catholicity crossed national borders in the Europe before modernity gets wiped out, to the extent that even so-called even the transnationalism of the Catholic community gets fragmented into national competing rivalries that become expressed during wartime. And I'm wondering, in your sense of things, in the post-colonial context, have we moved beyond that? I mean, is it the case that in times of geopolitical struggle, Christian minorities in India and Christian minorities in Pakistan see one another as brothers and sisters, or do they subordinate that to larger political narratives, just similar to Vietnam and Cambodia and circumstances like that? So I'd like to hear your thoughts a little bit more on how those two things fit together.
Thank you. At the moment, I think we don't have that kind of chemistry where you have, minorities in one country of Christians, joining with or feeling solidarity and then coming together. At least in Asia, we don't have that so much, Whereas in Islam, we have that, ulama, that we call that Islamic community. So it has that different conception of society and what do you call solidarity and religion. So we do not have that one. But let me go to, if I understand right, with the implications of the question, that we have a situation of identity politics. Identity politics. If you see all over the world, there are ethnic conflicts. Ethnic conflicts are there, linguistic conflicts, geographical conflicts are increasing. So the famous work of Samuel Huntington, Clash of Civilizations. But I would like to also you to read the response to Samuel Huntington by Amartya Sen on identity. Where he comes, of course, he argues 2-3 main arguments he brings. One of the arguments he says is that identity is multi-layered. So we have instances where singular identity is pushed because the socio-political circumstances turns a normal identity into a critical identity in a struggle for right or whatever it is. An oppressed group, highlights its identity because it's an important instrument, the weapon of the weak, against the powerful. But we also have situations where a small minority identity imposes its will on the other people, So I think we need to pay attention to the multiple layers of identity. And today, religious identity gets projected as a means of redressing long-standing oppressions and injustice. Therefore, I think the future where, because this is one of the points which is raised, if you say pluralism means, yes, you must allow that diversity, but it's not a closed identity. As long as it does not remain a closed identity, then it's a dangerous, open identity. You root it as well as cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitanism is a mindset, where you are able to feel at home with another culture, another people. It's beautiful, with intercultural, etc., etc. But as of now, we have conflicts based on identity politics, which I have to take into account. And each case is different.
Felix, thanks for a very interesting talk, and thanks for your focus on Asia. And I appreciated the sort of trajectory from the FABC documents to your account of postcolonialism in ecumenism. I wanted to follow up on what you mean by postcolonialism and postcolonial theory. That was a point that you didn't get to develop at the very end, and I wanted to see you develop it. The reason why I wanted to see you develop it is because the Asian American historian Gary Okihiro has written a book recently called Third World Studies, in which he says that the promise and project of the Third World and the various liberation movements over the 20th century for the Third World all were sort of co-opted by what you call identity politics or nationalist movements, that movements that were meant for self-determination were co-opted by regimes that claimed to be about self-determination, but really ended up in causing repression, and also ended up in turning in developing political economies that were equally imperialistic. And so I was wondering how the sort of post-colonial theory that you're sort of advancing will be kept from being co-opted and leading to ecumenism itself being co-opted by imperialism.
I'm no advocate of post-colonialism. I'm very much aware of its own limitations. I spoke 2 months back in Frankfurt because I was on this post-colonialism conference, and there was Leela Gandhi was exposing, but mostly the post-colonial studies are done in the English departments, mostly.
Yeah.
And I said, you are doing very good service because the cultural studies they are doing. It has helped the feminism,
Sure.
Post-colonial perspectives have helped, further the feminist agenda, so many things it has done, but it has got too much of rhetoric. Maybe it's because it's connected with the English departments. I told there were also people from the English language,
Yeah.
But you have done a very good job of, deconstructing many of the things. So in many respects, it has a very good positive points, but also limitation. I'm no advocate of anything. Anything which helps truth is fine, an instrument. So you don't need to be, what do you call, hard-hearted, and fixed that this is something which I will define by truth, by all means. No, not that attitude. If it helps, fine. You throw some light, in that sense. Not as something which should be, basically, since the first question was that, basically it's after, you can have a post-chronological sense, in the sense that after colonialism, but that does not really happen because there's a neo-colonialism happened, But there are impulses, which helps us to deconstruct the intimate enemy, That means the colonialism is internalized enemy inside. The enemy is within, in the practices of the colonized people. And therefore here, as I said, mutual relationship, So as you cannot understand Protestant without Catholic, you cannot understand the colonized without the colonizer without the colonized, So the initial impulse, for example, like Frantz Fanon, that the famous book, the white, black skins, white masks. Whereas a psychoanalyst, he went deeply into how the colonized people are psychologically affected to hang on to the values of the colonizer. It's a beautiful analysis, which was not there, Therefore we have people who they are really the ones. Therefore I said in my talk in Frankfurt that you should not lose this connection with the reality and simply end up, in some abstract theorizing.
Which is what most cultural studies
Yeah, exactly, cultural studies,
That is actually a good point, excellent point, because I think even though post-colonialism is not always seen as a chronological development, as you said, but I think the reality also is, as you very well said, is that post-colonialism, at least in the latter phase, where people like assume that there is a reality because there's actually a post-colony. And so maybe actually the other question could be here, what is going on the ground about ecumenism in the post-colony? How is that discourse shaping the churches in the former colonies, other than the multiplications and proliferations of new forms of religious life, which we ought to celebrate? But what critical questions could we ask about developments in the post-colony itself which is either contributing or inhibiting ecumenism?
I'm not sure whether I understood you rightly. Please correct me. What if I take, for example, the case of African independent churches? The first time, the African people can say, it's our church. We are there. You can have a lot of critique about that. They can dance because I think Busi Bulaga who said, not that I think therefore I am, I dance therefore I am. So powerful, bringing out the ethos and of a people. I think so. We have the example of African independent churches where the body is very important. Think about the Roman liturgy. There's very little about the body, that kind of thing. So I think this movement, we don't be too much worried about, this the organizational unity, bringing everything under one umbrella. The life is pluriform, like the quote of Joseph, Old Testament we read, so many colors. So we have another expression of it. The ambiguity is in every church. Which church does not have ambiguity? Pentecostals, I have to defend the Pentecostals because the Pentecostal is not a fundamentalist movement. Fundamentalist movement looks backwards, restoration. Zealots of the New Testament were backward looking. They want to restore what was there, whereas Pentecostal says here and now experience, unmediated experience and future. There was something very wonderful, and the Quakers in England were the first Pentecostals, the Shakers. And they were the ones for social justice, for the workers. Our Cadbury, in Birmingham, for the workers, what he did, he was a shaker. It's a Pentecostal. Therefore, it's a lot of social. So, what I mean to say that we should allow and we should acknowledge the ambiguity of every human effort. We do not have an immaculate situation of a church which is, Pope himself has said, a church which gets dirtied because it's on the street, etc., etc. So we have to live with this ambiguity and see the flourishing. We have in India this beautiful image where the lotus flower, which has roots in the, sediments, but beautiful flowers. Something beautiful comes out, and I would think that this kind of efforts are something beautiful. And Africa, if I read correctly, that the mainline churches are losing political influence. It is these independent churches which are becoming politically very important for various reasons, of course. So this factor also we have to take into account.
All right, so I can just get a good summation of what you were discussing. I came in a little bit late. So when you look at the different splits that have happened between the different church communions and the splitting off, so in your analysis, would it be looked at that both sides had various errors, and for there to be ecumenism, that both sides would have to look at themselves critically, and then especially in light of, Roman Catholicism and the See of Peter, where does that come in? Because, when you talk about the power and the authority and, in the special disposition that is claimed as far as Peter being found in the apostles and having that authority, how is that expressed in the context of ecumenism as far as, the Pope claiming primacy? And I know, looking from the standpoint of the Orthodox, for instance, there has been this willingness to accept the primacy of the Pope in a different format, but it would require what they were talking about, a type of bending of the Pope to probably let go of an absolute type of power. And where do you see it, and especially when you go out further with Pentecostals and you go out further with mainline denominations, I mean, where is that in this post-colonialism that we're talking, that we're talking about? Is it like antithetical to being able to move forward with ecumenism, especially like when we're talking about unity and diversity and difference? I mean, is this going to be looked at as inherently imperialistic? I mean, where does that fit in, or does it fit in? And then especially like when you look at more traditional Catholicism, that is going to be earth-shattering if you start saying, the Pope has no special claim to primacy or authority.
I will answer briefly the first question. You wanted summary, what I meant, since what I meant is with one sentence, cast wider the ecumenical net. So don't restrict it only to relationship among the churches, wider ecumenism, learn from, the relationship among the religions, relationship towards other creation, all that, that's one. The second part is a major question, is about Peter, primacy, all that big question. That's what I referred to, also quoting Lucas Fischer, that this juridicism of the conception of power is the biggest obstacle to ecumenism. That we must recognize it. But some corrective could be done from historically, but it depends how it is going to be from an inner church problematic, in the sense that if you see the early church, there was a pentarchy. Are you aware of the word pentarchy? The rule of five. The five patriarchs were in charge.
Oh, okay, yes.
Five patriarchs, Alexandria, Antioch, Alexandria, then Rome. In this whole system, the Bishop of Rome is the patriarch of the West. See that, no? Therefore, they are equals, but there is a preeminence of, that in the early church, where there was not organizational structure in imitation of the Roman Empire, which we have still, but regional groupings, provincial churches, synods, etc., which decided things. So, if we put that, the papacy becomes much more simpler. If you dismantle, once you have created, according to the Roman structure, a papacy, then it is frightening.
But then you have Rome's first monk equals 1
So, whatever, the communion, the communion among the churches. So if you start with that premise and go to history, etc., I think it would be much more easier than if you come out, who is the supreme authority in the church. So juridical questions, which again can become a big obstacle. So there, as I said, quoting the canon law 755, supreme authority of ecumenism is the Pope. So what about the people? There's nothing. Church is the people of God. There's no correspondence between Vatican II and the canon law. The people have to do ecumenism.
This is a great statement, and I think we can see it as the closing statement. Now, this session, there is possibility to get into interaction afterwards, and I give back to Bill Kavanaugh. Thanking very much.